India's new Income Tax Act is being pitched as a 65-year reset. Simple drafting, a unified tax year, faceless assessments, tighter timelines, and what the CBDT calls a shift to a trust based regime. But beneath the clear language lie hard questions. The effective tax on unexplained income has been halved to about 39%. HRA limits has been expanded for more cities, PAN threshold tightened for high-value cash transactions, and retrospective amendments attempt to settle long-running disputes. Is this genuine simplification or a sharper, more data-driven state? Today, we decode what's relief and risk and what taxpayers should brace for. Listen on, it's Friday, the 13th of Feb. I'm Anirban Chaudhary. This is the Morning Brief. Hi Aditi, very warm welcome to the Morning Brief.
Thank you, Anirban. Thanks for having me on this on your podcast and giving me this opportunity.
Pleasure, Aditi. Okay, now we are talking about the new income tax rules, but let's start from the budget document, and what it implies. Now, the CBDT chief recently said that Budget 2026 marks a move to a trust-based regime as the Income Tax Act, of course, kicks in from April 1st. Now, how big a reset exactly is this?
Sure. So, this is a very interesting and I think a very nuanced question in the sense that the government has been moving towards a trust based regime for some time. So, I think a significant move in this respect was the fact that, your income tax returns are all now filed online and they have been for some time and they need not be accompanied by any supporting documents or proof or evidence. So they've been moving towards this system for some time. And the idea is that the new Income Tax Act, it should retain the core principles and provisions. They should ideally remain unchanged. And that's been the stance of the government. But at the same time, it's a pretty big reset. There are some significant changes. New rules have been proposed. New forms are in draft stage. So there is a lot that is in flux right now. So considering that the current act has been in force for 65 odd years now, there is quite a bit for taxpayers to adapt to.
All right. One of the interesting things was this bit about unexplained income, which is, of course, I think assets you haven't declared, you can do that later. And that tax is cut to 30%, effective 39%, from earlier effective rate of 78%. Now, how do you see this tax on unexplained income, first of all, and how do you see the cut?
I think, again, the idea is, like you said, to move to a more trust based regime, right? The earlier rate, the base rate was around 60%, which resulted in an effective tax rate of about 78%. The base rate has been cut now to 30%. So the effective rate is about halved at 39%. So this is all in all a good move, and it has created a permanent voluntary disclosure window of sorts. The message from the government is quite clear that, you disclose voluntarily, pay lower taxes and just be on your way. Or, the alternative is that the tax department, if they detect some undisclosed income, right, then you can be subject to pretty hefty penalties going up to 200% for misreporting of income. What they've essentially done is they've reduced the exit costs, so to speak, associated with black money and unaccounted income. So this should basically nudge more people to come forward and disclose. Also, the earlier rate was pretty punitive, right? In the sense that 78% tax rate, that was a huge deterrent. So in that sense, this is a much more defensible rate. So the idea and intent seems to be that the lower rate will be offset by more and more people disclosing. So, all in all, this seems to be a very good move to promote voluntary disclosures and transparency.
Do you see hassles in implementing this?
See, I think with any new change, or there is always a little bit of a procedural issue or a roadblock that's there. We've had like amnesty schemes introduced, right, from time to time. This is, in a sense, a quasi amnesty scheme. And it is sort of there now enshrined in the statute book, so to speak, instead of having an opt-in window or an opt-out window or stringent conditions being attached to it. The idea is that the stigma associated with having unaccounted money or declaring something like that, the idea is to sort of reduce some of that.
But on the flip side, don't you think it risks normalizing delayed disclosure?
I really don't think it does, right?
Okay.
Because I think the issue there is, or the hanging sword that is there, is that if you delay disclosure unduly, right? What if the tax department detects some undisclosed income or transaction before you disclose? Then you are looking at very, very stringent penalties and possibly prosecution as well. So there's always that hanging sword or that sort of a deterrent. So I think in a very macroeconomic sense, the idea is to broad base tax to a certain extent, that you lower the burden so that more people come into the tax net. So that's how I am really looking at this.
Understood. Now, another sort of taxpayer related question. Now, the 2025 Act replaces previous year and assessment year with a unified tax year concept. Tell me more about this and what advantages do you think taxpayers will actually see?
Sure, I think this is a very important simplification, and I mean, this was much needed. Also, this is in line with the international practices. Now, income earned in the previous year was assessed to tax in the assessment year, which was the following year. Now, I mean, number one, the nomenclature of previous year itself is a little bit confusing and it's hard for people to understand. And then it was hard to reconcile that there are these 2 years and you earn income in another year, in 1 year. Then what tax rate do you look at? Because you had tax rates for TDS for 1 year, but you had assessment rates for another year. So, all in all, it was very confusing and it led to errors in tax filings and just generally a lot of avoidable confusion. So, my first thought around this is that it's going to immensely reduce cognitive load for the common man. It will help just have a simple common system. You have a particular year, you earn income in that year, and you apply tax rates that apply to that year. And it's going to eliminate filing errors to a large degree, and it's going to help standardize communication. And this is also what, investors and international tax systems are used to. So it'll help us reconcile with that as well.
Okay, that's very comprehensive, Aditi. Also, draft 2026 rules expand metro HRA benefits and recalibrate PAN thresholds for high value spends. HRA obviously rings a bell for sort of employees like me. But can you explain this? Although I don't think I fall in that high value spend bracket. But can you explain this a little? And is it a relief for taxpayers or is it just more surveillance?
So, first, let's talk about HRA, right? There was the 50% HRA tax exemption limit that was restricted to Delhi, Mumbai, and Chennai and Kolkata. That has now been extended to cities like Pune, Hyderabad, Bangalore, and Ahmedabad. I mean, all of us have experienced that rents and in these cities were anyway catching up with cities like Delhi, Mumbai, etc. So the government has really recognized that and has increased that limit to 50%. So that's a good move and it should entitle more people to higher HRA exemption. Now, there is a similar increase in other limits. For instance, employer provided meals, right? Like up to 50 rupees per meal used to be tax exempt. Now, I think all of us know food inflation and just generally changing times. 50 rupees per meal is a pretty insignificant limit. So they've increased that up to 200 rupees per meal. And similarly, employer provided loans up to 20,000 loans weren't treated like a taxable perquisite. That has been increased to around 2 lakh rupees now. So, all of these, numbers and the limits that existed, they've needed changes and updation for some time now because they were pretty outdated and didn't really keep up with inflation, etc. So this part of it, I think, is very helpful in that sense, and it's going to help a large number of people and particularly employees. But on the other hand, there is also a question around high value transactions, right, and more surveillance around that. So I think the idea seems to be that the government wants to reduce scrutiny of low value and routine transactions and enhance scrutiny of high value transactions, or things that they deem or view as risky. So, for instance, now there is a mandatory PAN requirement if you withdraw 10 lakh rupees in cash in a year. And similarly, there is a mandatory reporting requirement for banks for similar cash withdrawals. So it looks like the government wants to obviously scrutinize the cash economy and cash transactions more. But one must bear in mind that anyway, the system has been moving towards this for some time. We've all experienced, the notifications and posters and shops basically saying that 50,000 rupee daily cash limit that has been enforced for some time now. Plus, a little while ago, a TDS was introduced if you withdrew more than a crore in a year in cash. So the government has been looking at the cash sector a little bit more. So this is just a move in that direction.
Understood, understood. There are now expanded powers around faceless proceedings and also tighter timelines under the new act. How do you really see this? And do you see this skewed more towards administrative efficiency than maybe taxpayers' comfort?
I think, see, the faceless system and things like e-filing and increased automation and technology, they've certainly made compliance more time bound and streamlined to a certain extent. There are things like dynamic resource allocation, right? With basically, it's your case is assigned on an automated basis to, let's say, an assessment unit that has less workload. So that's going to, reduce the burden from overworked zones and assessment units. There is going to be more data driven analysis. There are now specialized assessment units and verification units and review units. So all of this should really increase efficiency and reduce workload on overtapped segments. At the same time, when we talk about very tight timelines, there is some concern there that may lead to mechanical orders. So we've all been there as tax practitioners that when tax assessments are getting time barred, there is that rush towards the end where show cause notices are being issued and taxpayers need to really respond within a very, very tight timeline. So the quality of assessments and the quality of submissions tends to go down at that time. We've all been subject to very cryptic and mechanical and non-speaking sort of orders. So that's a big concern. I think a human checkpoint is always very important and needed. So if the system becomes completely faceless, right, and personal hearings, they become discretionary. So, taxpayers could earlier sit in front of the tax officer and explain their case as a matter of right? But now, if let's say you just have a virtual communication window with your tax officer, and that also becomes discretionary, it can really lead to fundamental misunderstanding of your case and tax issues. Because I think all of us have been there, right? Like, imagine you're sitting in the officer's chair and you receive like a PDF of some 1,000 pages attached. It would be, in most circumstances, it would be pretty difficult to understand and distill complex financial data and, really get to the crux of the issue and understand everything yourself. Of course, last but not the least, with technology, there are always glitches and errors and overburdened systems and things like very mechanical things like the website repeatedly logging you out and all of that. So, I mean, those things are always a concern. I think the key is really going to be in the execution. One will need to balance procedural fairness with automation.
Understood. And I'll slip one final question in, Aditi. If you were to, sort of look 5 years out, does this new income tax framework really reduce litigation and compliance anxiety, or are we simply looking at a new cycle of new kind of disputes?
Again, this is such a complex question. See, I think the government really is trying its best to reduce litigation. You have dispute resolution committees for smaller cases. Then there are mechanisms like advanced pricing agreements and safety net provisions and safe harbor margins to reduce transfer pricing litigation. Then there are things like mutual agreement processes in the current budget as well, right? Three or four substantive issues that were being heavily litigated before the high courts and Supreme Court. They've sort of been settled by way of amendments. Now, but the catch here is that all of them are retrospective amendments. So that has really opened a can of worms around the fairness of it all, right? And also, there are questions around how those retrospective amendments will be implemented. So, I mean, what happens to open cases, right? What happens to cases that are somewhat settled, but the department or the taxpayer still has the right to file an appeal? So, I mean, while the idea there was to settle litigation to a large extent, it's led to some more questions. So I would like to say it depends, and the devil really lies in the detail. We'll have to really see as to how the execution of these measures, which is intended to reduce litigation, will be carried out. It's very hard to predict at this stage.
Right. On that note, thank you so much, Aditi, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Anirban, for having me over, and it was a pleasure speaking to you. The promise is clarity. The risk is complexity in execution. Years from now, this reform will be judged not by drafting elegance but by fewer disputes, fairer assessments, and lower anxiety for taxpayers. Until then, the balance between trust and scrutiny remains the real test. That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by me, sound designed by Rajas Naik. A new episode of The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Keep listening.